Society says women nurture. But what happens when they destroy? Not in rage, not in defense, but with planning. You've heard about male monsters. But today, we flip the script. These are the most evil women still locked up in America's darkest prisons. Stick around. The final case is the only woman on death row in her entire state. Case 4. Heather Mack. She was born into luxury, raised in a $1 million estate outside Chicago. Heather Mack was no ordinary teenager. Her father was jazz composer James Mack. Her mother, Sheila von Wies Mack, was a wealthy academic and socialite. But wealth didn't buy peace, and it couldn't stop what was coming. Heather and Sheila had a history, documented in over 80 police calls to their home in Oak Park, Illinois. Neighbors described screaming matches, shattered glass, and broken doors. Sometimes Heather called the police. Sometimes Sheila did. One report described Heather punching her mother in the head, then locking herself in a room. Their relationship wasn't strained. It was dangerous. But no one expected what would happen next. In August 2014, Heather, then 18, convinced her mother to take a trip to Bali, Indonesia. She claimed it would be a healing vacation, a chance to reconnect. She even brought her boyfriend, Tommy Schaefer, along for the ride. Sheila paid for everything. They checked into the St. Regis, one of the most luxurious resorts on the island. But just 3 days in, Sheila von Wies Mack would be dead, bludgeoned, folded into a suitcase, left like trash. The plan had been in motion long before the plane touched down. On August 12th, hotel surveillance captured Tommy entering Sheila's suite. He wasn't a guest in that room. He was carrying a heavy fruit bowl. Inside, an argument broke out. Tommy later claimed Sheila became aggressive. But what followed wasn't self-defense. It was slaughter. Tommy struck Sheila repeatedly with the bowl. Over the head, over the face, over the neck. Autopsy later revealed Sheila suffered at least 7 forceful blows, one of which fractured her jaw and caused massive cranial trauma. She collapsed on the floor, bleeding, gasping, as her daughter waited outside. After the murder, Heather entered the suite. The two lovers then stuffed Sheila's body into a suitcase, forcing her limbs to bend unnaturally. They wheeled the suitcase down the hall. Heather smiled at staff, then left it in the trunk of a taxi and walked away. The driver waited and waited. No one returned. After an hour, he opened the trunk. Inside, he found the corpse of a woman, contorted, crammed into a suitcase barely large enough to hold a carry-on. She had been left like cargo. The hotel immediately alerted authorities. Within hours, police traced Heather and Tommy to a different hotel where they were hiding in a second-floor room, watching TV. They offered no resistance. They didn't even run. At first, Heather denied everything. She said she didn't know what happened, said Tommy and her mother fought, but she had nothing to do with it. But investigators weren't guessing. They had hotel security footage. They had Heather's text, chilling messages sent to Tommy weeks before the trip. One read, "She knows I'm pregnant. If she finds out you're coming, she'll freak." Another, "We just have to be smart. Do it clean. I don't want blood all over everything." And when pressed by police, Tommy confessed. Heather Mack was pregnant at the time, 7 weeks along, carrying Tommy's child. She was detained at Bali's notorious Kerabokan prison, where she gave birth to a daughter behind bars. The baby, named Stella, would remain with Heather inside the prison for the first 2 years of her life. The trial drew international headlines. A wealthy American heiress. A vacation-turned-murder scene. A body in a suitcase. Tommy admitted to the murder. Heather admitted to helping clean up the crime, but denied planning it. The judges didn't buy it. Tommy Schaefer was sentenced to 18 years in Indonesian prison. Heather Mack received 10 years for accessory to murder. But the story was far from over. In 2021, After serving just 7 years, Heather Mack was released early for good behavior. Indonesian authorities deported her immediately. She boarded a flight back to the US with her daughter in her arms, but as soon as she landed in Chicago, federal agents were waiting. Heather was arrested on the tarmac. What the public didn't know was that the FBI had been building a secret case for years, charging her with conspiracy to commit murder. They claimed Heather wasn't just involved, she was the mastermind. Prosecutors revealed that Heather and Tommy had discussed killing Sheila months before the trip. They searched how to kill without leaving evidence. They rehearsed stories, they scouted locations. And the motive? Money. Sheila's will included a $1.5 million trust fund, but it had one condition. Heather could only access it after her mother's death. When Heather found out, her messages changed. She began pushing Tommy, told him she couldn't live under Sheila's control, claimed it was the only way. One conversation read, "If she dies here, no one will find out. We'll be home before the news hits." That was all the prosecution needed. In 2022, Heather Mack pleaded guilty to conspiring to kill her mother. She was sentenced to 26 years in federal prison. Today, in 2025, Heather Mack is incarcerated at a federal correctional institution in Illinois. She's 29 years old. Her daughter, now a grade schooler, lives with relatives, far away from the prison walls. But the headlines haven't stopped. In early 2025, Heather filed a federal lawsuit alleging molestation by a female prison guard. According to court filings, the guard repeatedly assaulted her during invasive strip searches. Heather claimed that when she resisted, she was threatened with disciplinary infractions and solitary confinement. The Bureau of Prisons launched an internal investigation. The case is ongoing. Some say she's lying. Others believe it's yet another chapter in a life defined by power struggles and manipulation. But legally, nothing's been proven. Yet. What we do know is this. Heather Mack planned a murder on foreign soil. She watched it happen, then helped shove her mother into a suitcase. She walked calmly through the lobby of a 5-star resort. She smiled for cameras, played the victim, and later admitted that she wanted her mother gone, not in self-defense, not in panic, but for freedom, for money. A daughter planned her mother's death in paradise, then zipped her away like baggage. And now she waits, in a concrete cell, still young, still dangerous, still very much alive. Case 3, Yolanda Saldívar. She was supposed to be loyal, supposed to protect the legacy. Instead, she pulled the trigger. Yolanda Saldívar was once a name spoken with trust inside the walls of the Quintanilla household. She was a nurse by trade, soft-spoken, meticulous, and she was Selena's #1 fan. In 1991, she asked to start a fan club. Selena agreed. The idea took off fast. Hundreds, then thousands of members. Yolanda was praised for her devotion. She became the club's president, then the boutique manager, then a part of the family. Selena's father, Abraham Quintanilla, trusted her. So did Selena. But what no one saw coming was that behind the fan mail, the adoration and the hugs, was obsession. Selena Quintanilla was more than a pop star. She was a cultural icon, the queen of Tejano, a trailblazer. She shattered charts, broke records, crossed borders. By 1995, Selena was preparing her first full English-language album. The crossover was expected to be massive. Movie deals, Grammy buzz, a global star in the making. But the person she trusted to manage her boutiques was quietly stealing from her. The first red flags came in early 1995. Boutique employees began complaining about Yolanda, describing her as controlling, paranoid, and verbally abusive. Then came the missing money, discrepancies in checks, unpaid bills, invoices that made no sense. Selena's father began investigating. What he found was devastating. Tens of thousands of dollars were gone. Bank records showed Yolanda had been embezzling funds from the fan club and boutique accounts. Confronted by the family, Yolanda denied everything. But the numbers didn't lie. Selena, always diplomatic, wanted to handle it quietly. She still believed Yolanda was a friend. She wanted to recover the documents and move on. It was a decision that would cost her life. On March 31st, 1995, Selena met Yolanda at a Days Inn motel in Corpus Christi, Texas. The meeting was to retrieve missing financial records and finalize their professional separation. What happened next unraveled in seconds. The women argued. Yolanda pulled a .38 caliber revolver from her purse. As Selena turned to leave, Yolanda fired once. The bullet struck Selena in the lower right shoulder, severing her subclavian artery. Critically wounded, Selena ran, leaving a trail of blood through the hotel corridor. She reached the lobby and collapsed. Before losing consciousness, she did one final thing. She named her killer. Yolanda, room 158. EMTs arrived. They attempted to stabilize her, but the damage was massive. Selena was rushed to Memorial Medical Center. Doctors opened her chest. Massive blood loss. Cardiac arrest. They fought for 50 minutes. At 1:05 p.m., Selena Quintanilla Perez was pronounced dead. She was 23 years old. Word of the shooting spread within minutes. Radio stations were flooded with calls. Television news cut into programming. The woman who had captivated a generation was gone, and her killer still at the scene. After shooting Selena, Yolanda Saldívar ran to her pickup truck in the hotel parking lot. She held the gun to her own head, then called 911. For 9 hours, she sat in the vehicle with a gun to her temple, crying, rambling, threatening to harm herself. Police tried to negotiate. Crowds gathered outside. Eventually, Yolanda surrendered. She was taken into custody, still claiming it was an accident, but nothing about what happened was accidental. The investigation was swift. Ballistics confirmed the bullet matched Yolanda's gun. Witnesses at the motel reported hearing shouting. Selena's fingerprints were found on the door, the walls, the blood-soaked tiles, and most damning of all, her dying words. She had named her killer. Prosecutors charged Yolanda with first-degree murder. At trial, her defense claimed the shooting was unintentional. They said Yolanda was emotionally distraught. They argued that she only meant to harm herself. The jury didn't buy it. In October 1995, Yolanda Saldívar was convicted and sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 30 years. She was sent to the Mountain View Unit, a women's prison in Gatesville, Texas. There, she has remained ever since. But prison life has never been normal for Yolanda. From the moment she arrived, she became one of the most hated inmates in the system. There were threats, daily. Guards reported inmates planning attacks. The prison placed her in protective custody, isolating her from general population. For nearly 3 decades, she has lived in a windowless cell, under 24-hour surveillance. No interaction, no work duties, no contact without permission. Even inside prison, justice has a memory. In 2025, Yolanda Saldívar became eligible for parole. Her first hearing was scheduled for March. It made headlines across the country. Public backlash was immediate. Petitions with hundreds of thousands of signatures demanded that she remain behind bars. Protesters gathered outside the gates. Selena fans flooded social media, urging the parole board to deny her release. Some death threats were so specific, Yolanda was moved to an undisclosed unit for her own protection. As of now, the parole board has not granted release. And if released, experts say she would likely require a new identity, federal protection, and permanent relocation if she wants to stay alive. Selena's family has never forgiven Yolanda. Abraham Quintanilla has called her manipulative and unrepentant. Her sister, Suzette, has refused to speak Yolanda's name publicly, and fans, they've kept the memory alive. Every year on March 31st, vigils are held in Texas and across Latin America. Murals, flowers, music. In the years since the murder, Yolanda has given interviews from prison. In one, she claimed she was misunderstood. In another, she said she still loved Selena. She has never publicly apologized, never admitted guilt, and never explained why. She didn't just kill a star, she killed a movement, and millions never forgave her. And now, nearly 30 years later, they still haven't. Case 2. Antoinette Frank. She swore an oath to protect, to serve, to uphold the law. Instead, she executed it. Antoinette Frank was 23 years old, a rising officer in the New Orleans Police Department. But behind the badge was something darker. From the moment she applied to join the force, there were red flags. Psychological evaluations warned of instability. Supervisors noted emotional detachment. Even her past was full of contradictions. She lied on her application, concealed prior mental health issues, and was nearly rejected. But the department was desperate. New Orleans in the mid-90s was reeling from violent crime and understaffed precincts, so they let her in. And within months, they'd regret it. Antoinette wasn't just unfit to serve, she was dangerous. She frequently disappeared from her post, showed signs of manipulation and erratic behavior, and then she began dating Rogers Lacaze, a known drug dealer and gang affiliate. Her colleagues warned her, commanding officers raised concerns, but she didn't care. She gave him access to her patrol car, took him on ride-alongs, even let him wear her uniform. The line between officer and criminal blurred until there was no line at all. The target was Kim An Restaurant, a small Vietnamese-American eatery in New Orleans East. The owners were known in the community, hardworking, quiet, family-run. They often stayed late to clean, counting receipts long after closing time. Antoinette knew that. She'd worked paid security shifts at the restaurant before. She knew the layout, the exits, where the cash was kept, and most importantly, she knew who would be there. On the night of March 4th, 1995, she returned to the restaurant, but not to protect. She came to kill. Shortly after midnight, Antoinette arrived with Rogers Lacaze in tow. She was in uniform, armed, trusted. The owners let her in without hesitation. Inside were two teenage siblings, Ha and Quong Vu, working the register and cleaning up for the night. Also present, Officer Ronald A. Williams, a fellow NOPD officer working an off-duty security shift. He had no idea this would be his final patrol. Without warning, Rogers pulled a gun and opened fire. Officer Williams was shot multiple times in the back, execution style, before he could even draw his weapon. Ha and Quong ran for cover, but Antoinette blocked their path. She wasn't shocked. She wasn't confused. She was part of it. After the first wave of gunfire, Antoinette left the restaurant. She walked to her patrol car, radioed in a fake robbery report, then returned inside. But when she entered again, something had changed. Quong Vu, the teenage boy, was still alive, hiding beneath a table. He had witnessed everything. Antoinette raised her weapon and shot him point-blank in the head. Then she found Ha, terrified, cowering in a corner. She shot her too. Twice. 3 people. One of them a fellow officer. All murdered. By someone wearing the same uniform. But something went wrong. Ha Vu survived. Bleeding, barely conscious, she managed to drag herself to the phone. Dialed 911. Gave the dispatcher a name. It was the police. Antoinette. By the time backup units arrived, Antoinette was already at the station. Calm, composed, pretending she had just stumbled onto the scene. But she didn't know that Ha was still breathing. Didn't know she had already been identified, and when investigators searched her belongings, they found the murder weapon, blood on her boots, and surveillance footage showing the moment she and Lacaze entered the restaurant. The case was airtight. In court, the evidence was overwhelming. Testimony from Ha Vu, ballistics matching her service weapon, forensics, witnesses, security footage. Antoinette tried to play innocent, claimed she had been tricked, blamed Lacaze, but her lies crumbled under cross-examination. Prosecutors revealed that this wasn't a random robbery, it was premeditated. They showed text messages and conversations planning the hit. They introduced witnesses who testified that Antoinette wanted to eliminate Ronald Williams, a fellow officer who had threatened to report her behavior. The motive? Cash and control. In 1995, Antoinette Frank was sentenced to death. She became the first female officer in U.S. history to be sent to death row for murdering another officer in the line of duty. She was also convicted for the double murder of Ha and Quang Vu, both of whom had done nothing more than show up to work that night. Rogers Lacaze was sentenced to life without parole. Antoinette Frank is currently incarcerated at Louisiana Correctional Institute for Women, one of the most secure facilities in the state. She remains on death row. Her execution has been delayed multiple times due to legal appeals, competency hearings, and constitutional challenges to the state's capital punishment procedures. But as of 2025, she's still eligible for execution, still waiting, still breathing. Public memory hasn't faded. Ask anyone in New Orleans who remembers 1995, and they'll tell you. Antoinette Frank didn't just betray her badge, she weaponized it. She used her uniform to gain access, used her training to corner victims, used her authority to silence them. And even after conviction, she's remained cold, unmoved, unapologetic. In recent years, Antoinette's legal team has pushed for her sentence to be commuted, citing claims of mental illness and procedural misconduct. But every motion has been met with resistance by victims' families, police unions, and prosecutors. She is still considered one of the most reviled inmates in Louisiana's correctional system. Security measures around her remain tight. She receives no visitors, and her name is still spoken with contempt by the very department she once served. She wore the badge, then murdered those who trusted it, and to this day, she has never once said she's sorry. Case 1. Christa Pike. She was only 18 years old, but what she didn't belong in a teenager's mind. It didn't belong in any mind. To this day, nearly 30 years later, she remains the only woman on death row in Tennessee. And when you hear what she did, you'll understand why. Christa's story starts like so many others. Broken home, absent father, abuse. She was born in West Virginia in 1976. Her mother was an alcoholic. Her early years were marked by instability, trauma, and neglect. By the time she hit her teenage years, Christa had dropped out of high school. She had bounced between homes. She was using drugs. Her mental health was already unraveling. And then she found something to cling to, something she thought gave her power, control, Satanism. Christa became obsessed with the occult. She told friends she could summon spirits, that she had dark abilities. She drew pentagrams in notebooks, talked about rituals, and soon after, she found someone who shared those interests. In 1994, Christa joined the Job Corps program in Knoxville, Tennessee, a federally funded educational and vocational training center. It was meant to give her a second chance. Instead, it gave her a stage. At Job Corps, she met Tadaril Ship, another student. They quickly became inseparable. They talked about Satan, about death, about violence. And then, they started talking about Colleen Slemmer. Colleen was another Job Corps student, 19 years old, outgoing, friendly, but to Christa, a threat. Christa believed Colleen was flirting with Tadaril. Whether it was true didn't matter. In Christa's mind, Colleen had crossed a line, and there was only one way to deal with it. On January 12th, 1995, Christa Pike lured Colleen out of the dormitory. She told her they were going to make peace, that they were going to smoke, hang out, talk. Colleen agreed. She had no idea what was waiting for her. Christa, Tejano, and another girl, Shadola Peterson, walked Colleen over a mile to an abandoned steam plant behind the University of Tennessee campus. It was isolated, dark, concrete, and shadows. Once they were far enough from help, Christa made her move. The torture lasted over 30 minutes. It started with insults, then punches, then the box cutter. Christa began slicing Colleen's chest, stomach, and arms, over and over. Colleen begged for her life, cried, screamed. Christa mocked her, laughed, told her she wasn't dying fast enough. At one point, she carved a pentagram into Colleen's chest. Deep, bloody, ritualistic. Tejano joined in. They took turns holding her down, slashing, hitting. They kicked her in the head, beat her with a chunk of asphalt, again and again, until her skull fractured. Christa stood over her, watching, satisfied. The final blow crushed Colleen's head, and when it was over, Christa took a piece of Colleen's skull as a souvenir. She put it in her pocket and left the body there, barely recognizable, face destroyed, chest mutilated. They walked back to the dorm like nothing happened. Later that night, Christa bragged about the murder to friends. She laughed, said it had been fun, said she'd do it again. She pulled the skull fragment from her pocket and showed it to people. The very next day, she began writing confessions in her journal. I don't know if she's dead yet or not, but she sure as hell was cold. I couldn't have imagined what it would be like to see someone beaten to death like that. It made me feel real good inside. Another entry read, I beat her brains out, cowed her. I made sure she was dead. When investigators found that journal, it wasn't the only thing that sealed her fate. They also found the skull fragment, covered in dried blood. They found blood on her shoes. And when Christa was questioned, she confessed. No hesitation. She smiled. The autopsy revealed the full extent of the horror. Colleen Slemmer had suffered over 40 injuries, most of them to her face and head. Her jaw was broken, her nose crushed, her skull cracked open. The pentagram carved in her chest was nearly 4 inches wide. She had died slowly. Christa had made sure of it. In March 1996, Christa Pike went to trial for first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder. The jury took less than 2 hours to convict her, and at sentencing, the evidence spoke for itself. The judge called it one of the most sadistic crimes the state had ever seen. She was sentenced to death. Tejano Ship, 17 at the time of the killing, was too young for capital punishment. He received life in prison. Shadola Peterson, who had witnessed the murder but didn't participate, took a plea deal in exchange for testimony. She served a brief sentence and was released. But Christa Pike, she never left. She's been on Tennessee's death row for almost 3 decades, locked away at the Tennessee prison for women in Nashville, isolated, watched, waiting, and during that time, she's done little to suggest remorse. In 2001, Christa tried to kill another inmate, hiding a weapon in her waistband and attacking the woman in a holding cell. She stabbed her repeatedly with a sharpened piece of metal. The woman survived. Christa was convicted again. Another 25 years added to her sentence. Her attorneys have filed appeal after appeal, arguing she was mentally ill, that she suffered from brain damage, that her childhood trauma made her unstable. But the courts haven't overturned her sentence. In 2025, she remains the only woman on Tennessee's death row. Her execution date has not been set, but the sentence still stands. In interviews, Christa has said she's misunderstood, that she was young, that she made mistakes. But the crime, the details, the sheer savagery, they don't fade. Christa didn't kill out of impulse. She tortured for satisfaction, and that makes her the most evil. And even now, after all these years, she still hasn't said sorry. These women didn't just kill. They shattered trust, desecrated bonds, tore through lives like paper. So now we ask you, who do you think was the most evil? Was it the daughter, the fan, the officer, the satanic killer? Do any of them deserve parole, or should they stay locked away forever? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Hit like if these stories shook you. Subscribe, because the next countdown only gets darker. And if you think evil has a face, just wait until you see who's next.